All right, now what I'm going to talk to you about is typography. And typography is extremely important. It's an extremely important part of what we're doing. And especially now looking at the lexicon is word-based. But what typography is how you shape those words, how you demonstrate those words, how you show those words. And there are traditions and standards that relate to typography. Typography really has its roots in the 1400s, the 15th century of all places, where when there was first printing in Europe. So that's when we see typography, that you could create letters in different shapes. Before that, you had people who created letter shapes by hand, and original typography, as we're going to see, really did follow that. But typography is how those words are shaped. And typography itself has a strong connection with color. And I'm going to show you a few things here. These are kind of the mental tricks at first. And this is the Stroop effect. And this is actually that words themselves are more powerful than the color. If I tell you that first word is yellow, you think yellow before you go, oh, green. If I asked you the color, you are much more likely to initially say the color that is written, not the color that exists. So some kind of fun games have been developed around this, but this is the power of words. Color is powerful, but words, in fact, can be more powerful. So what we're striving for when we use typography is something that's readable, something that's understandable, and something that is consistent with what we're trying to communicate. So if with that first word we're trying to communicate yellow, it would probably be good if the word yellow wasn't yellow. We can look at even this. If I ask you the color of that first square, there the color becomes more powerful, but it's still, that word is so strong. Okay, and the fact is our brains do more with words than we realize, and colors associated, but with words specifically, our brains do much more with it. So this is how we operate, and a lot of that is going to be based on Gestalt principles. So take a second, look at this. So if you want more time, you can pause the video and you can take a look at this longer. But once your brain gets the rhythm of it, but the thing about this, the reason you can read it is because it is, even though it's not the right letters, even though it's numbers mixed with letters, it is the right number of letters, and it takes on the shape of those words. So the 7H15 looks like this. There are attributes to it, and our brain makes those connections, and we can see that in some different ways. This would be illegible if the word was not actually the basis for each one of these, and so it is based on something, and some of that, because these are all caps, these words are essentially rectangles, but we can see the word in it. And it's like it says, once we get the rhythm of it, we can start to read it and understand it. And this actually opens creative doors for what you can do with type and typography, letter forms, things like that. So when I talk about letter forms, that's what the letters look like, the form of the letters. when I say a font, it's a group of letter forms that are connected to one another in their style. And then I talk about styles, and styles are groups of different fonts that are similar, have similar attributes. So once again, if you're having trouble with it, you can pause the video and take a look at it. But it is a pretty useless skill unless you're a designer. There are times when you can do this to attract attention. Sometimes you can make errors into something interesting. You can make errors appear to grab attention and draw people in and sort of force them. Other times errors are just errors. And in this case, it's consistently applied. Okay, so this is based on research, and what you see here is in these words, it's uppercase and lowercase, and the words actually have shape, they have form. So even though they're misspelled, they look like the words. It is the right number of letters, and the brain, a lot of times I've had this argument with people. Some people say we read strictly by spelling. I say this argues, and it's always sort of been my point of view, that a great deal of how we read is visual. If it looks like the word, we first assume the word, because we don't, when you're comfortable in a language, you don't read it by spelling every word. You see the word, and it's recognition, and you move on and you go past it. And that's going to work the same in English or in Arabic. So this once again demonstrates that, and that a very big part of that is that the shape of words are. The shape of words are the most important factors for understanding those words. Here in the case, what you can see is here in uppercase, it's in all caps, all capital letters, uppercase, all the words actually become like rectangles. So you do more spelling of those words. You can see the length of the words and you can see them happen. If you're very familiar with them, you can probably read them. But they're much faster and easier to read when they're in lowercase because the words very much have their own shape. So like in Arabic, where there's no uppercase, all words you as a reader of Arabic can understand it and move through it. So the shape of words are very important. And the way we control the imagination or the understanding of words and how people see their shapes are with good fonts, are with good typography. And that allows us to read it in really effective ways. So this is just, in spite of the little red underlines, this is taking that last little trick of the mind from the Cambridge University study. We can read both of these, but for my money, in using lowercase, operating with lowercase, it's a little easier. So pause that if you want to look at that a little bit and think about it, and we'll move on. Okay, so the importance of type. Take a moment to read this. I'm going to read it to you because I do think it's that important. I think it's actually pretty great. It's really well designed, and good graphic designers do type. And even here, in something that's a bit of a jumble, once you start reading it, you can see where to look. Dear Typography, I know you don't get enough credit for what you do. Few people are aware of your existence, and fewer people know how much how you influence the things they like. It's difficult because you always remind us of something else. I want you to know that I see you. If you ever feel insignificant, consider this. If it wasn't for you, no one would have any information, and this wouldn't be a very good poster. I do think it's a pretty good poster, but it's the idea. It's difficult because you always remind us of something else. If the typography is good and we're reading it, we don't think about the typography. What we think about are the words themselves. So for the most part, typography allows us to see the words so that we don't have to think about the design. So the importance is that it takes us through to the content. But doing it well and doing it creatively requires an understanding of type so that in some ways, it can disappear and not be obnoxious and jump out at us. All right, sorry for that interruption, but we're back again. So we're going to move along from here. And so this is the importance of type. So let's learn more about the importance of type. So what it does is, in essence, type can be used in three ways, and that is the direct communication of information, as the poster says. It can, and in communicating that information, or it can be used to support the visual design of what you've made, so like your lexicons, and the colors you're using and the style you're using. It needs to support that visual design. And then it can also, all on its own, be the center of visual design, where a design will stand up based on the letter form. So in terms of communication of information, this is a very early printed piece of paper. It reflected the way people wrote, but this is printed, so this is based on a font. And if we spoke this language, we would understand it. It's in Latin. In the same way, this is Albrecht Dürer, actually, and it's about the anatomy of type. So it's using humans, showing how letters are formed. And this is the first time when printing came along. This is actually a book from the 16th century, so from the 1500s, maybe even from the 1400s, the 15th century, 15th, 16th century, very early book. And it was starting, that people thought about, how do we shape letters? How do we create letters when it's not just by hand? So this printed book talks about the anatomy of type. And then we come forward to the 19th century. This is crazy mix of fonts and styles, and it's hand printed. And this is sort of a classic railroad poster on a broadsheet, which were billboards that would be printed and then stuck on fences. It still happens in big cities like New York and London and different places in America, sort of classic cities, different places in Europe. You still sometimes see these. I think it's most vivid to me from New York because it seems very old school. But when you see something that says post no bills, it means don't stick anything like a broadsheet up there. But this is telling you all about taking a trip on this train. This is from the 1900s, J. Walter Thompson telling you about their advertising business and exactly how it works, telling you what you should know about advertising, and it's quite beautiful. So this is a magazine page, and you can see the fonts. It's got some different ways. It's too small for you to actually read it here, but this is where the type is really communicating information and connecting with the picture. So this is an ad for a bicycle. And you can see, obviously, there's a lot of text that's communicating more information than just the picture of the bicycle. And very important information is dependent on fonts. So this is pain reliever, paracetamol, and it's giving you all the information. And the thing like as that poster talked about, we don't always think about, is that even an object like this, a package, has to be designed, and someone has to give thought about how those letters look. So even here, we've got alignment from the bottom of the package to the side of the package. The other side, there's alignment of the text. Here, alignment. And this is actually a sans serif font. It's more of a humanist style font. And I make that judgment based on the A. I'll talk about that in a minute. But all of it, there's design. Even the color, appropriate to Tesco. And even originally, somebody had to design a UPC code to see what they look like. So this is all communication of information, and it is designed. It doesn't just happen by accident. I would hope you would not buy drugs that look like somebody wrote by hand. That doesn't seem very safe. It doesn't seem very professional. And this is a generic, so it looks a bit generic, that they're telling you exactly what it is so that you know. Okay, so this is a magazine article. It's a interview with Jodie Foster. It's quite a few years ago. But when you look at it, these are quotes. These are her talking, so each one looks a little different. And each one is, turned in its own way. It's using a lot of different fonts. It's kind of a creative way to do it, to place her quotes and then have the picture of her. So also we see fonts that are still communicating information, but here they're directly supporting the visual design. So you've got the visual design and the angles, and it's very geometric. And then the letters themselves reflect the overall style. So it communicates that very style. This is from the 1930s. And we could go in depth and talk about this. This is from some classic books on graphic design. Here, a much more modern font. These are some of my favorite style designs, kind of the Art Deco, the 1930s once again, but really clean, solid colors, things like that. But also, if you look, this is a sans serif font. It has no little serifs on it, but it definitely supports the visual design, and it tells you exactly why you're looking at an airplane, and a boat, airplane. Okay, so those are the point of that, different airports in New York. Then supporting visual design, this is from a poster, and the type itself becomes the wheels on the bicycle. You can even see the motion in her feet. And it says, "Go out to get Women's Day," which was a magazine. And so you make that connection. So it's basically a mom and home. It's connecting all these things. But the choice of font is what works with that bicycle, and it's a great design. Here we also see this is an advertisement from a women's magazine for patterns, dress patterns, for sewing and things like that. But you can see the curving and the words go right with the body shape and the attitude of the women. And so it is supporting the visual design while communicating information. Then you have type that is the center of visual design. So this is actually a classic. IBM, which is a computer company, International Business Machines. There's only one actual letter here, and the original logo actually is the original logo is the capital letters IBM in this style by Paul Rand, and then he did this creative version of it, but it's rooted in this type, and even here in the B, we see the lines, and so it has a very I could actually look at this for a very long time. There's just something about it. I like kind of simplified things. This is actually very old, and it's using the type and its shape and its visualization to make the text work. So pause that maybe and look. A mouse that he met in the house, let us both go to law. I will prosecute you. Come, I'll take no denial. We must have a trial. For really this morning I've nothing to do, said the mouse to the cur. Such a trial, dear sir, with no jury or judge, would be wasting our breath. I'll be judge, I'll be jury, said cunning old fury. I'll try the whole cause and condemn you to death. So it takes a poem and it makes it visual. So it's not just words that you're reading, but it is a visual design that makes it interesting. This is from Dadaism, which was sort of nonsensical. There is meaning in there. This is Italian, so you're not going to be able to read it, but it's using the letters to be the center of that design. And it's pretty random. Dadaism is like, a bicycle wheel on a top of a table, things that don't make a lot of sense, but it's in that visual design. This is Russian from the 1920s, and it is the type that is the center of the visual design, and that's what's driving you to see it. This is really cool, and we would sort of now, in the age of computers and things, think how simple this would be to do, because it would be very simple. But this is handmade, and he's thinking about it, and the lines are perfect, and obviously it's the shadow we want to be able to read. And this is actually the name of the artist down in the bottom, Norman Belgettis. But the type is the center of the design. And notice the diagonal line, which makes it interesting, that we've talked about a lot. So that's also, okay, the word tonnage has weight. Okay, when is a heavy weight of advertising dollars bound to succeed, and when is tonnage bound to fail? So this is actually from Young and Rubicam, and it's an advertisement about advertising, but it is using strictly the visual nature of the type to do it. And I mean, that's a very heavy type, and it weighs down the entire picture. And this is from the 1960s. And the type itself is the center of the design, the very hippie thing. So we have the photograph, but then the type in the glasses, not completely easy to read because of the color, not completely easy to read because of the letter shapes, but it's reflecting something very cultural at the time and very rock and roll and all that. Now there's this being the center of visual design. So these are words, and right there you might see the profile a bit, but when we pull back, well, okay, I'm going to show it to you in a little bit. So this is the type, and the way it's collected together is actually used to make a picture. So you might be seeing the face a little bit, and we'll see it from a farther distance in a bit. Okay, so let's now change tacks a little bit and talk about the anatomy of type, and that is the physical shape of type and how we describe it. It gives us a common vocabulary. Because I'm immersed in it, I've already talked about it a bit because it drives what we're doing. So it is important to what we're doing. So first thing, at least for Roman-based letters, which is any of, English, Spanish, most European languages. I mean, you do have some letter forms in Greece. You do have Arabic that are different. That's different letters, different alphabet. So it's not just about that the words are different, but also letter shape. So this is basic for that. We talk about uppercase, which is all capital letters, and that was the first letter shapes that actually come from Rome. That's why they're called Roman letters, the Roman Empire. And you can, if you go to Southern Europe, you can go to some places outside of Monaco. There's an old Roman place, and it's carved in the letters. In Spain, obviously all around Rome, you can see these letter forms. They're quite beautiful. And initially, it was all capitals. So the way that Arabic is all small letters, lowercase, what's called lowercase, or uncial, which is the smaller letters. There's no capitals. That was, I don't know if it was created to be an antithesis to this all capital, very strong thing. But the reason it's called uppercase is actually very practical, is in a printer's office, the capital letters were in the top cases because they were used less when you went up to find them to set type, and the lowercase letters were in the lowercase because you used them a lot more in type. So it was a very practical thing. You put things in the uppercase because they needed to go somewhere, and since you used them less, they were in the uppercase. A little bit of trivia. Okay, so that's uppercase and lowercase, and these are capitals, so I'll probably use that interchangeably as capital letters. We'll talk about all capital letters, all caps, things like that. And then I'll definitely say lowercase, though uncial is sort of the more technical word for the smaller, the lowercase letters. So that's just giving you some vocabulary. Then when we look on typographic anatomy, this is one that it would be of interest to you to pause and look at. All the different parts of these letters have names, and it's the anatomy, the structure. Some of the most important things for us are an ascender, and actually this, this over here with the dotted lines. So the baseline is the line at which all letters sort of where it sits. And then what it says down here is about the midline, and that is the top part. That is the top line of the lowercase letters. Okay, so understanding that that line exists, letters then have ascenders, and that's the part of the, that is the part of the line. I mean, that's the part of the letter form that extends above the midline. And then in this particular font, so we have the cap height, which is capital letter. That's how tall, that's the height of a capital letter. Okay, and this is actually the one above it. In this case, the ascender for lowercase letters is higher than the cap height. So the ascender goes above it, and then we come down, and this we'll see in a minute is our descenders. So these are ascenders, these are descenders, okay? Then there's lots of other things, the counter, we will talk about the axis and the stress axis, the stem. This is a pretty detailed part. This is an addition, a swash, a gadzook. Pretty crazy, but we'll talk about the foot. We talk about the different parts of the letters. And so this is the rest of that. So then we see the X height, and the X is the most standard letter. It has no ascender, no descender. And that is what this line is from the baseline to the midline. That is the X height. And then this, you can see this is the descender, and that's the part of a letter that goes below the baseline. So those are the basic things. And then the strokes, we'll talk a lot about the strokes, and diagonal stroke, the I and E, but that is what we're talking about. So that's the ascent, this is the descent, and these are the most important parts of it that we're going to talk about. This is another one, anatomy of type, gives it in a single frame. You can look at it and see all those same things. The mean line, the X line, the midline, whatever, the cap line, the ascent line, baseline, descent line, and you can see all the different parts, and we've got serifs, we've got stress, we've got all those things. So this is where I'm going to break those parts down. These are the ones that are key within that anatomy for understanding a font. So serifs, okay, serifs are these pieces, okay, the Greek, that are these pieces of a letter. So when you say sans serif, it means it doesn't have a serif. In Latin, sans means without. So a sans serif is without, but these have a serif. And that was created to make it look more like it was calligraphy and written by hand, and it connects the letters. So there's different kinds of serifs. These are diagonal serifs. There's also slab serifs that look like a box. And the way a diagonal serif look can be different things. So those are things added to the letter that gives it calligraphic form. Okay, this is the stroke, which is the stroke of the letter. It's the main body. You can see these four are all from the same font, so that width is the same. Tension is the transition and the tension. So the question is there a great deal of tension in the transition, which means the transition is the change in the stroke from thick to thin. If you've ever done calligraphy, when you hold the brush straight and then you turn, okay, depending on the angle you have the brush, that transition will be much greater from thick to thin or less from thick to thin. So that then becomes the tension. If there's a big difference between thickness and thinness, it's high tension. If they're pretty close to the same, it's low tension. And in fact, there are some fonts, geometrics, that have no tension at all because the transitions don't actually exist. The stroke is consistent throughout. So that's transitions. This is talking about the stress angle. So you have stress. So this is pretty high stress. This is a modern, so it's extremely high stress. You almost have like a thin, a pencil line, and then the rest of the stroke has more body. But then we talk about the stress angle, and that is it vertical? So these, you can see here, most fonts have a stress angle that's vertical. This is the one I was talking about. There's no stress angle because there's no stress. And there's actually a type of font that I'm not going to name, and it's actually called transitional, but it has more of a diagonal stress. So any layer that has any letter form that has thick and thin has a diagonal stress. So if you remember the things I talked about in terms of diagonal lines, that can create more dynamism, whereas this vertical stress is still stable, and no stress at all is super stable, but that has more stability, whereas the diagonal maybe takes on a more human view, but that's the stress angle. Okay, we talked about the X height, so there's the X, that is the center point, the main part between the midline and the baseline. Okay, and then we have ascenders that go above that, and I've spoken about that, and then we have descenders down to the descender line. Okay, so let's talk about styles of type. These are groups of type that different fonts, so they are different, they have different appearance, but they have similar attributes in their anatomy. So these are the styles. Black letter we don't use very much, but this goes back to the very first typesetting in Europe with Gutenberg and the first printing press, and this is very much how many people wrote by hand. But what you can see is this one. This is called black letter. This is a black letter style, and the particular font is called Fleisch-Wolf. It does feel very German. It's based on geometric shapes. In fact, this one is based on triangles primarily and a collection of them. And when you see fonts similar to this, you recognize them. These are black letter fonts. By the way, the reason the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog is because it includes every letter in the alphabet, that phrase. There are some newer ones that people have done, but this goes back to typing, and actually it was also part of typing exercises on a keyboard because it involved every letter to see how quickly you could type it. So this is black letter, okay? This is a Roman font, and you can see that there's some stress. It is, this particular one is a bit more modern, Times New Roman. This is the New York Times was set in this, that's why it's called the Times. But, and it's very readable, but you can see it has slight diagonal stress. It has these small serifs. It has a lightness and a readability, but a Roman font goes back to the classic first forms of letters, and there's a whole range of different Romans. And the thing is, when you choose one font, you choose one within that style. You do not operate with multiple fonts from the same style. So you need to be able to recognize it. So it has it does have diagonal serifs. This one has a moderate amount of stress. Some of the older ones, some of the more classic ones have less stress, and some of them have vertical stress. The stress line is vertical. But then every font has different ascenders, different descenders, different level of the X height, and different levels of cap height. And so when you look at them, my personal preferences for liking a font, very honestly, is the lowercase g. I really prefer this kind of G. And then we'll see, well, I'm pretty sure we'll see the G with the straight line, but I base it on the G, and because I'm Russell, I look at the capital R for my name, which distinguishes preference, and then even the W, how does the W look? So that's from my name, and the B's my middle initial. But you look at those things, and I look first at the G. I have specific preferences about A's. I like that A, okay? And so I take these letters, and that tells me what I like. But this is a Roman, okay? So black letter, Roman. This is a modern, and this particular one is a classic of modern. And what makes a type modern is that the technology of type got better. So the stress and the tension is extremely high. It's pencil thin stroke with normal stroke, and that required some technology to do. Dido is very beautiful. It kind of is maybe a little, it's a little classier than this. This is kind of, it just seems thicker and heavier. Moderns feel lighter because of the very thin lines, but then they also have an expression with, you have to ask yourself, does it fit with what you're trying to say and how you're trying to say it? So then we have something that's called Egyptian, which in terms of Egyptian is a slab serif, and what you can see, the slabs are boxes. I'm going to stop again for a moment. I'll be back, and you won't even see the time pass. So Egyptian slab serif, I'll probably use slab serif a bit more than the phrase Egyptian, but that will tell you about that. There are variations of this that have been made. I mean, what really gets the name Egyptian are really huge serifs and things. Sometimes we associate them as kind of Western looking or from a particular time period, the 1800s, and these were usually done in woodcuts and things like that. But it's Courier is actually a slab serif, which is one that's on everybody's computer, and this is Rockwell, which is one that's a bit more stylish than Courier, but you can even see virtually no tension. The strokes are extremely even, which makes it fairly modern, and particularly computer-based fonts have the ability to have this lack of stress. Gosh, I can maybe see a tiny bit, but it's really not much. It's still got the A. This is that other kind of G, not my favorite. That's just the descender is just hanging instead of having a bowl, and I prefer the bowl. And even this R is a little awkward because its bowl is kind of tight, and I can see my name and think that is a little awkward, but it's very even. And you see even here how the serifs line up across the top. And when they're a slab, it's like they create almost a line going across the whole thing, and even that W. So I'm looking at those letters. So Egyptian, that's what describes it. Slab serif. There are serifs, and those serifs are slabs, like a box, a big thing. So humanist is one kind of sans serif type. Sans serif are called grotesque, because for a lot of people, why would you not have a serif? So I think it got the name grotesque, and I'll remember the other one in a minute. But humanist fonts tend to have an A that has a bowl, has a small bowl with a sort of, if I go back to the anatomy, it's a two-part letter instead of a single-part letter. You can see even here, this particular one has the G that I like. The R in this one is not terrible, but humanist means it is a humanist sans serif. It is sans serif, but it's less computer-like. I'll show you. When we look at geometric will be completely geometric. There's still some, like if you look at this R, there's a little bit of tension in that R because you can see the skinny part. So that means it's also going to happen in the M and the N. And that gives it a little more feeling that it's a little more like calligraphy. So that's what separates a humanist. For our purposes, I think the best way to make that separation is by looking at the A. Because when we go to a geometric, that A becomes this, the sort of open, almost O with a line on the side of it. So it's not a two-part A, it's a single part. And even here we can see the G. The G doesn't always apply, but this is geometric. Everything about these, you look at the O's. The O's are geometrically perfect. So that is a strong indicator. You look at all of these. This geometric sans serif has a mechanical efficiency. Even this one's kind of crazy because even there, look at that J. That the J has no curve. I like my J's to have a curve. See, even here, if we look at the more humanist Gill sans, there is at least a bit of a curve on the J. Whereas here we go to slab, okay, modern Roman, having the hanger on the J, even here with the geometric shapes, the J transforms from each one of those. That basically the thing that makes it a J rather than an I is the fact that it descends below the baseline. So that's geometric. Those are the sort of standard traditional naming of fonts, the font styles, but then we also have these ones that I like that are a lot of fun. They're very specific and they have to be used in a very specific for a purpose. And this is a script. A script looks handwritten, looks cursive, has that more flowing. So this is a script. This is Cocktail Shaker. This feels very 1950s. I love 1950s kind of style font. It's just a thing I have, the 30s and the 50s, I guess. Here we have a script. So this is called Coffee Service, which essentially means it was designed like it could be on the menu board. Here you can see it has that plain G. It's a nice Z. It's a great, and even there you see the J has the flow to it of handwriting, and it doesn't really have serifs, but it has these connecting lines that when you put these together, they look like script or handwritten cursive letters. Here, even Swing Bold, which is a little more mechanical, but you can see it has the script feel. These are horrible capitals to me. The A is kind of fun. You can do some things with that A. But here you've got the G with a little bit of a flare on it, and the A is the open A. So those are script. So script styles look handwritten. Then we look at hand. And obviously we could say handwritten for script, but script is cursive, whereas hand is writing block letters. Now, I have to be honest, this is how I print. I'm not very good at cursive. I really like hand fonts, and hand fonts are block letters that look like they're written by hand. They have very much an organic feel. They don't have machine accuracy. They feel something you'd see in a letter or a comic book, and they fulfill some of those things. So this one's very simple. It's a Vera. We could look at Bradley, and you can see it looks like printing. I wish I could print this efficiently. And so hand fonts, this one starts to become a little more comical. The G is super fun. But what you can also see is there's really not an X height, at least in this one. There's not a standard X height. There's not a standard midline baseline. Even here, the Q is in some in-between space. The O does not have the full size. So it makes it very organic. This one's called Swing Set. Okay, we look at Bradley. Bradley really does have a midline and a baseline and a pretty standard X height, but there even the X drops below the X height between the midline and the baseline. But this one is far more regular. This one is very regular. If we go back even to the scripts, okay, these are following the rules, but when we get into hand, and particularly like this one, Swing Set, so it's swinging back and forth, it doesn't have the regularity, so it becomes more childlike. And if that's what you're trying to communicate, this is the type of font you want to use. Okay, then we go to decorative fonts, and decorative fonts are very expressive of maybe a design era, something like that. We'll see a few. This is Bachland's Universe that actually is from the Art Nouveau period. It looks like it's from posters from that period, Mucha, and those sorts of things. The thing about decorative, even script, even hand, they have to be very specific to the purpose. Why are you using them? So this has some beautiful letters, and I like the style. If you ever go to Prague, this font, this very much this style of the Art Nouveau is on a lot of buildings, and it is just very specific to when those places were created and when the buildings were built, and a style that the city has. You can find it in Paris as well. I believe the metro, where it says the métro, the subway trains use this style, that when a lot of people, when they see it, they think of Paris Metro and that sort of thing. So here is a style. This is a favorite of mine. This could go into hand, but this is very much comic book, and it's so much thicker than how a hand would write. But what you can see is it's very sans serif because the letters are very even. It's almost like a humanist because we've got on the R and the M and the N. Okay, we've got some of the feel. It feels hand-drawn a little bit, but it also feels computer-made because of its accuracy and those sorts of things. But I totally love this X and its imperfection. But you can see it does follow. It has a standard baseline. It has a midline. The X height is fixed for those letters. And I love this G. It's very unique to this designer. And I like Grow Bold in that way. So it's one that even if I abandon it, I end up coming back to it because I've used it a lot, but it has features I like. But you can only use it in very specific places and ways. So that really crosses over from hand to decorative. Here, once again, this is in that space. This feels what Mary Poppins. Yeah, this is kind of Mary Poppins. It's called Jambo. The Q is the lowercase q is interesting. See, this one has that baseline is not dead straight. So it's just a little more random thing like that. And then you have these super extended swashes on the R, which makes the R very fun. And there you can see. So this one just feels like decorative. A lot of fonts that look like movie posters and stuff like that, they are designed very specifically for that movie, what it's about, what they're trying to communicate. And you really wouldn't have a lot of uses for them. You have to be careful when you use a font. If it makes the viewer, reader, user think of a specific thing, it may not be what you want because they will not be thinking about what you wrote, but they're like, what does that font look like? Where's that font from? And anytime you make people think about the font, that can be considered a mistake. So then we look here. This is actually one I made based on another one. I tried to build it out. It was actually only capitals, and I built out this small one. It's not very good. But it also has limited use. Unfortunately, I have the time to become expert at this. There are companies that make fonts, and they sell them, and there's places online where you can get them. Also, another place, okay, I believe I pointed you guys to the free places where you can get free fonts, and for our work, that's totally fine. But also within Illustrator, within Photoshop, within InDesign, any of those things we use, we have access because we have the Adobe Creative Cloud. We have access to Adobe fonts, and Adobe has a whole bunch of fonts based on classic styles, based on their versions, their slight variations of a whole lot of fonts. So you can download those, and as long as you're using the Adobe software and you're a part of it, you can use those fonts. One of my favorite Arabic fonts that I'm going to show you in a little bit actually comes from there specifically. So you go in and you actually when you open the font, it'll give you like a search line, and you can search, and it will go out into Creative Cloud. It goes out into the cloud and will bring you back a whole bunch of results. So okay, so that's decorative. Now, another aspect of fonts is their weight. Okay, so within a font, there is a font family. So each one of these is the same font, but it's in different weights. So this is ultra thin. This is thin. This is regular or book. It's the middle place. It's the most legible. This would be semi-bold. Then this becomes bold. Or this could be bold and this is extra bold. So a fully developed font family will have a lot of different weights, and sometimes it will have some variations on the font where it'll be taller and thinner. And if it's thinner, then it's called a condensed. Sometimes it'll be wider, and that will it'll be called wide or something like that. So it's based on the same letter forms, but you want to use, when you're doing proper design, when you're doing lexicon, you want to use fonts that have been made into these weights, because these weights there's changes in the letters. If you look at these two cues, when you just use in Word or something like that, you can't do it in Illustrator, you can't do it in Photoshop, and you just apply bold to it, and it just makes it fatter. It just adds pixels. It's not really doing the design work of how that font should be expressed in that heavier weight. And using different weights can allow you to have some variety in your design, and it's just based on weight. And because it's the same font, they go together. They work together. So that's weight. There's also italics. Italics first showed up, Bembo italics. Bembo italics was one of the first one. It's the slight lean that makes it more of an action font. It was sort of an attempt at cursive, early attempt at cursive, but keeping the conservative nature. You don't use a lot of italics. When you use italics, it draws a lot of attention to the word. So if you ever do research papers and things like that in APA, you use italics for that very reason, to respect the name of a journal, to respect the name of something. You put it in italics because it makes it special. So you really don't want to use it a lot. And actually, what we'll see in Arabic doesn't have italics because Arabic itself is very organic to begin with. But italics give a little bit of a dynamic. So these two fonts are the same, and the weights are the same, but these are the italic versions. So you can see even down here in this extra bold that actually looks pretty nice. It actually works in italics better, and this could be a nice title, that sort of thing. So that is weight and then italics. So if you use these fonts together, you don't change the font when you go to italics. You want an italic that's in the same family. So that's the way it works. Okay, so we're going to talk now about functions of type. And the functions of type, first of all, we talk about display. Now this is obviously an imitation in English letters of an Arabic style or something in the neighborhood. It's sort of making English look. So that is very decorative. I wouldn't use it a lot. If you were talking about something Middle Eastern, I'd be super careful. It seems really stereotypical and not the most creative, but that's the idea of a decorative font. So basically, I've shown you here on this side what each one of these are. So this is in all caps. The whole font is all capital letters, and then you can see that the caps are a little more fancy than the small caps here, but that's in all caps. Remember that all caps make words into rectangle shapes, not as easy to read, but this is also borderline decorative, very much an older style, very actually nostalgic, and I like it. Then I've got this as hand, but this is very much a comic looking thing. I believe it's railroad, but it's probably better described as, let's call it decorative hand, because it's connected. So it's printing, so it's hand, but it's much thicker letters. Then we've got a script, and whoops, now I'm starting to type all those things. Okay, so we've got a script style. that looks like handwriting and also very decorative. Let's even see. We could discover. Come here. All right. So, oh no, sorry. I actually brought those over from Illustrator, so that's a picture. So I can't click on it to tell you the exact name, but that would be a script. And then actually down here in the bottom, it's just based on my discussion of A's, we're going to call it a humanist. So that is a sans serif humanist because the A is a two-part A, but it does have that simplified G. So it has a little bit, but you can see there's a little flare in the N and the U and the H, so where those curves are. So that becomes more of a humanist. So those would be, it's called display type, or it's called titles. We looked at some of those articles where there were titles, it's big, and usually these will be very different than what you use for text, for script. So this is that same script. This is pretty hard to read. You would not want to set, you would not want to use. Now, okay, this is in nonsense text, which is used to make type choices. And in Illustrator, in Photoshop, if you lay out type, it will give you this lorem ipsum dolor sit amet. It doesn't mean anything in any language. It is nonsense, but it allows you to see letters and letter forms. And while this might be a style that reflects what you want, it's not simple to read. It is not easy to read. It's not clean. So using a script, you have to be very careful with it. Do you use it or not? How easy is it to read? Does it read as well as you want for everyone? Because then if you look to Roman, most newspapers are set in Roman. Roman has a connection to the past. It is very much a very readable in a lot of different sizes. It can get super small. And part of what makes it work are the serifs, because it connects the letters and helps the letters have a shape and a form. So Roman works especially in printed things. Then if we go to text for humanist, what we see here in the humanist is something, the sans serifs. So we've got humanist and we've got geometric. This is a favorite geometric of mine. Okay, not even here. I find this more readable, but these are very readable, especially thinner, sort of lighter weights and things like that. But these have become readable and get much more use in text on computers. So they can print okay, etc. Where we go to the classic, that everything should just be set in Roman or a transitional, even be set in a modern, because they're readable. But now we have humanist and the geometric. The humanist is, I think, more readable than the geometric, especially like this is Century Gothic. Gothic, that's a Gothic grotesque sans serif. So this is in that category, but it's so symmetrical that it can get a little tiring, whereas this has a little less symmetry. The letters have different shapes and things like that. So this is text. So the things you said in text, you have to think about how readable. We're not going to go totally in depth about, because I mean, typography, if you were in a particular, like a graphic design program, you would honestly have an entire class in typography. Okay, so type and design, we're gonna jump into this since it's on the video and you can stop and look. First is about mixing fonts. How do you mix fonts together? How do you combine them? What you don't want to do is you don't want to use a different font from the same style. I've tried to say that a few times. If you have Times New Roman, you don't want to use Times Roman. Times New Roman, you don't want to use Georgia. You don't want to use things from the same style. So that's why it's important to understand styles. Okay, so you don't you don't mix them because it looks like a mistake. They're slightly off. It's okay. And what it does is it draws people's attention to it. So that's why you need to know about weights and italics and those things. You want to stay in a family. Once you choose a font, stay in that family. And you can get entire families on Creative Cloud. The free font sites will have less of a family. If you find a font that you really love, hey, go to a place where you buy fonts and buy it. Because then you have it and you can get a full font family. And those types, those fonts, you can use them together. They work. But don't different font, same style. Okay? Don't combine a Roman with a modern, because a Roman and a modern are too similar. They have the serifs, they have some variation, but it's not enough variation. It's not enough different. Do it in modern or do it in Roman. Don't do both. And very clearly, don't use two different kinds of sans serif. And even if one's a humanist and one's a geometric, don't use them together. They're too close, they're too similar, and if you use both, it will become confusing. So, looking at the do's, same font, different weights, italics, that's about doing same font family. Do use Roman with an Egyptian, modern with an Egyptian, so Roman with a slab serif, modern with a slab serif. Do Romans with a sans serif, modern with a sans serif. So those are different enough. They have significant difference. And the differences here on Roman and sans serifs, modern and sans serifs, is greater than the difference you'll see here. This one might be a little sketchier. So maybe that should be a slightly different color so we can make it a lighter blue to say that's a touch more sketchy. Okay, and then do either a Roman, a modern, Egyptian, a humanist, or a geometric with script, hand, or decorative, because those are very different. So script, hand, decorative, which you're mostly going to use for title fonts, things like that. Don't use them in the body text. You can combine those. A key thing about design and type design, about any design, is contrast, contrast, contrast. I've shown it to you with color. I've showed you that one from graphic design in terms of size, direction, shape, all those things. Same is true in type. You need to contrast, because the problem is, if it looks like a mistake, it is a mistake. Because what happens is you need to keep viewers, readers, users flowing through the content, and you need to avoid making them think about the type. You want to, I call them cognitive blips, where you go, what? What was that? Where you notice the technique rather than the content or the experience, and you want to avoid that at all costs. So in video, they're called jump cuts. Across the board in design, you can do cognitive blips. That's when you do mixes of these. That doesn't seem quite right. And so the person starts thinking about, that doesn't seem quite right, instead of doing it. So you want people to experience the content, not the technique. So that's a good guide. This, I'm not sure if you can read this in the video. This shows, I will post this graphic. And so this actually has a nice with font names and how they go together, and they follow, this fundamentally follows different styles go together rather than choosing different fonts within a style. So you want to stay away from that at all costs. So this is actually what I've done. I'm going to show these for a second, each one. You can pause if you want to see. These show good combinations. And basically what all these combinations are is Roman or modern with a sans serif. So there's no humanist and geometric. There's no Roman with modern. It is it shows what you use for a title, and then it would show what you would use for text. Bodoni is an extreme classic, but we don't necessarily have complete access to all of these, but you might be able to find them. Some of them are on your computer. Some of you are real classics. And so they will already be on your machine, or you will definitely, there is Adobe Garamond, there's Adobe this and Adobe that. So Futura is out there. But to get the full family, you would have to invest some money, because that is a pretty sophisticated thing, as is Universe and some others. So I've got a number of pages of these. You see the example. So each one of these goes to that one. So you can pause to take a look at it, to see what those combinations are. So that, yeah, there's even, this is Clarendon, is a slab serif. So even slab serif with the humanist. There are no combinations here of slab serifs with Roman and modern. So that might be a bad idea. Actually, Baskerville is very interesting, because you can see that it has pretty unique serifs and how they sort of create these curves. It's got this nice style to it, so it is unique within serif forms. Okay, so let's look at words, letters, and pictures. Remember that one I showed you before? This is the guy. This is that total poster. When we were zoomed into it, we saw a little less of the face when you pull back a little farther. So the words are making the pictures. A place that we've talked about where words become pictures are logos. So I've got a number of these here. This is actually not a logo I like for a whole bunch of reasons, but you can see that in this dragon is the H and the K. And in fact, in this dragon is also in Chinese, is Hong Kong. So it's got Chinese and English in this. They paid like $1 million for this thing. And okay, I have to say it, my issue with it is it's a dragon. That's not unique. Hong Kong is unique in other ways, and a dragon kind of represents every Chinese city. So it has some creative ideas and elements, and it's also so strongly horizontal, it makes it less usable. And these fonts, while they're kind of Hong Kongish, are kind of cold and sterile. To me, they're so modern, and this has a more traditional, fiery sort of feel that these fonts should be used more effectively. This is Zayed University. Words, letters as pictures. So this is the Z of Zayed in Arabic. I do know that. For me, this is not the strongest possible logo. Once again, I'm not totally in love with this font, but this is a little weak. Here's my genius idea for the university logo, because this really wouldn't show up on a hat very well, and on a sweatshirt, I wouldn't be that excited about it. But if I had that, and then we could play with the font, very cool. Okay, so and actually I am going to give you a class activity, and that is to look at this, okay, and to come up with an Arabic font and an English font, a Roman font that would go nicely with the Year of Zayed image. This would be a fantastic logo for the university. That or that. Okay, so that's a little off track for a moment, but I think that's interesting. And the point is, there would be better fonts that would fit with this image and could be stronger, could be more powerful. That, which is letter as a picture. This is not letter as a picture, but there would be ways to improve it. And I think I'm also going to invite you to choose on the lapel magnets, things like that. There's about 3 different pictures of Zayed that I think would be viable and usable. And since this is around in a lot of places, even if it's Year of Zayed, it's Zayed, Zayed, Zayed. We're Zayed University. It would be nice. The connection probably exists. All right, I'll stop talking about that. So, and this is one that I made. This is not really words, letters, as pictures. I'm actually just using it. And this is Madani. It's actually a font that I absolutely love, but I use the Z as well. And this is an icon I made. I kind of like it. Honestly, that would be a better logo for the university. I apologize. In my opinion, I don't know who made or chose the other one, but yeah, see, I love the letter C. So that's part of my thing. Made it in Illustrator. Okay, so here's words and letters as pictures. Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank, recent rebranding. I love this, the Kufik, and doing this sort of design. Actually, a lot of Arabic is words as pictures because of design and restrictions on using images in Islam, which not problematic, makes complete sense to me. So Arabic has been developed as a beautifully written language, and the fact that it can take a whole bunch of shapes and you guys can still see the letters and you can still read it. This is the one I've shown you, which is CLP, so the letters become a picture, but it's also a Chinese letter, so I gave you a little more information. So there's the CLP, and there's China utilities. So that's kind of electricity and stuff. It kind of looks like a power pole. But you can see here that the shape is here. So that's just seeing it. And then I thought I'd show you this one again, since I love it. Words, letters as pictures. The N, the W, and all that. And I told you about it. But here's the new one they made. Seriously. Okay. I love this one so much. If we ever get back on campus, I invite you to come into my office because I've got toys from the airport that have this old logo on, like a plane and a baggage carrier thing. I buy weird things. What I consider souvenirs, most other people think is kind of maybe junk. I don't know, but it's got this logo on it, so I don't want it to be forgotten. But there's NWA, and here's what I think of when I think of NWA. All right. Because it focuses NWA instead of Northwest. And yeah, the A is probably not in there. They could have done something, and leaving the whole thing intact and then wrote airlines or something on there. I don't know. It could have been done. Yeah, they missed the point of the original logo. And that's what, for me, it ends up. But here, some things I just pulled off the internet. Where words are used as a part of the pictures. This one's fun. You see two people sharing Tostitos with salsa. Actually, the Tao, once again, shows the power of Arabic in terms of words becoming pictures. Words and letters as pictures. So if you did that with Roman letters and did it as organically and beautifully, you would probably lose it. Okay, this is a classic Japanese poster. This letter that has been shaped, reshaped, and all these different things, it means tree. That is the word for tree. So this becomes a forest. And, it has imperfection, so it has the poster, and there's actually the name of the designer down there. This is from a magazine where they took the letters to build the picture. And this is actually about a typeface. Quick as a wink, a typeface can express the creative mood and spirit of a photographic idea printed on fine paper. So this is actually advertising West Baco inspiration. This is also using a Chinese letter that kind of looks like a sad dude. I love that attribute of some of Chinese characters. And I know I should tell you exactly what it means, but I'm sure someone can put it in the comments. Okay, so type and design, we've already talked about. Text and color. And legibility, readability, super important. So color does play a role. And we talked about, look at traffic signs. Those are color combinations that work. And put light on dark. Don't put direct contrast because it'll create like gray unless you like that effect. Don't put dark on dark. Don't put red on purple. Red on black is not going to be very visible, where yellow on black or black on yellow, red on white, white on red, that sort of thing definitely works, because white on red is actually as powerful as green on white on green or white on blue. So that's just thinking about that color, and we have talked about that. So the things I'm not going to go into, and I've got some references at the end of this, are things like legibility, readability. Legibility is whether the letters look like the letters. Okay. Readability is how fast can people read through the text. And honestly, at the end, I've got a book called Stop Stealing Sheep that goes into that deeply. Kerning is the spaces between letters. Leading is the space between lines. You can control all of these things in Illustrator, and then alignment is very important. And I have and will talk to you about alignment and things like that. But we are continuing in a moment. All right, so the last part is, those would be the things in more detail, but perhaps many of you are asking the question, what about Arabic? So Arabic has been a part of typesetting and type. This is an anatomy of type book from 1529, the 16th century, and Arabic has always been included in that. So this is him showing the letters and the forms and the types. So there's some interesting spelling of Arabic. And this is actually saying it's including a whole bunch of things. But we have that in a book from 1529. Caslon, 1722, a very Caslon, there is Adobe Caslon. These fonts come from the 18th century. They're stunning, they're beautiful, they're still useful. And there you can see Arabic is a part of that specimen sheet. A specimen sheet would be what a printer would print to show you the different fonts they have. And originally printers would design their own fonts and cast them and set them. You can see it can get really tiny. So here, what we call Caslon is a Roman font, but he also created Arabic fonts, and he's got a couple variations on Hebrew and Greek. He's got 4 Greeks. Okay, so I guess, so there you see double pica Roman, and then you have double pica Italic. So seen as a little different. So that's 18th century. Arabic is included in the array of printable fonts. Bodoni, also there's probably a Bodoni font is a modern. But he also included in his type book Arabic and what Arabic design should look like. So it is has historically been used. Anything with an alphabet. Chinese is very difficult because there's like 10,000 characters. And to do a newspaper, you have to have at least 3,000 of those characters. That is very hard to set and type. It's much easier to do on a computer. But actually physically setting it and having enough pieces of type, it's difficult. But Arabic is a alphabetic language, so it can be set in type. If you look at, so you've got English, Greek, Russian, Cyrillic, Arabic, Hebrew, a whole bunch of different things. Anything that has an alphabet is easier to set or to design and all those sorts of things. Actually, Korean is not Chinese. It has an alphabet. And Korea was the first place where they created metal movable type, like a century before the Europeans, but sometimes it gets lost in the mix. But so Arabic was there, and basically you can look and see that Arabic, there are a lot of different fonts, which I would hope you guys are aware of. And you can make aesthetic choices. Some of them end up being in particular styles, but because of the nature of Arabic, they don't really fall into those exact categories because of the total organic nature of Arabic. So there's obviously Adobe has that, which is Adobe Arabic Regular, that kind of, you know, I guess maybe it's a Roman kind of thing. It's very standard. I would guess it's very legible. Then you have Arial, which is a Western font that's very popular, sans serif. This is way more stylish, a lot more flair and tension and a whole bunch of things here. And actually, even if we look at these, I don't know what you call these dots, my apologies, but that is a key thing that changes. So here, they're leaning rectangles. Here they're diamonds. Here it's squares. Here they're circles. Here they're circles. This is the one that Zayed I made, is based on uses Madani. Actually, Madani, which is primarily Arabic, has some pretty decent looking English lettered shapes, and it is definitely a and you can sort of see it here. It is definitely a geometric. It is definitely sans serif. But I really love, this is the one I got from Creative Cloud. This is Omnis Arabic Bold, and it has this would be the closest to something that's a little more decorative hand, where it's a thicker font, etc. But I'm sure they have different weights, things about that. So all those things exist that we've talked about for Arabic. This is Madani in thin, extra light, and this is Madani Arabic variable, okay? And this is variable, this is light, this is medium, this is bold. So it does get thicker. You can see how some of the things change, where it's not just thickening, the letter forms have changed. Now, with Madani, you can also see that there's variable light and Arabic, not the variation, not the variable. And if you look at these, you could pause this and stare at them for a long time. It's hard to really see how these are different. They're lighter at the same level. The Arabic is lighter, but there's two actually additional levels of the boldness. So maybe that's why they don't directly match. But the only thing, as I looked at this, it appeared here, is this character. To here, and you can see it here, that this would indicate that the variable is shorter. Okay, you can see it that here, okay, it's a little shorter. There's more open space, and this is where I saw it with this character in the straight Arabic rather than the variable. And then it carries through to here because we also see more space. Because even if this was thicker, this is more space. There is not a huge difference in these two. This is one of my favorite characters because it looks like a happy face. See, I see pictures. When I can't read the words, I see pictures. So, but that would be a family. This one, maybe not the best example, just because there's not a huge amount of difference. So then, just showing you some more Arabic fonts, because there are, it is a lower number than Roman fonts, but there are many variations. So this is a Tahoma Regular. And in this line, this is where it really shows its distinctiveness, is because everybody else sort of has this very self-contained. and here it's sort of opened up into much more of a freer hand. And there also you see squares, diamonds, 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 circle, circle. So then there's actually a font called Dubai. This is a Roman font and an Arabic font. There's Times New Roman again, and it has an Arabic version, just like I showed you in those other things. And this Giza Pro Bold has a different flavor, has a different character to even the Times New Roman has a little bit of lean to it that the other ones don't have. Then the D1 Kufi, very stylized. I've seen bumper stickers and things like that that are in something very close to this. And Kufi Standard, GK Regular, also. That there are many ways. So in using your Arabic words, don't just go with all the common ones. Go with the ones that help you say what you're trying to say, help you communicate what you're trying to say. So this is, I'll put this here on the end, this is the sources you can look at. That R. Williams is not me. Actually, it's a woman named Robin Williams who's written a couple really nice books about type design and design. And this is 2015 was the 4th edition. If you're on LinkedIn, LinkedIn has lynda.com, and she is on lynda.com as well. Eric Speakerman, that's the classic Stop Stealing Sheep and Find Out How Type Works. And Universal Principles of Design. If we were at school, I could go get you a bunch of these and you could take a look at the book physically. But this helps you understand design. Actually, the Lidwell book is really great. So that's the whole lecture on type. If you've made it through this far, mabruk. And hopefully it has helped.